want to talk a little bit about hand protection, particularly for longsword, but also for putting inside incomplete hilts, things like sabres and side swords and whatnot. Now, we all know that in longsword, hands get broken. It has been a problem since HEMA first started, trust me. What, of course, we would all like would be invisible force shield around both our hands that didn't require us actually wearing any gloves, and that would be the ideal solution. But as it is, we have to put up with compromises, and it's always going to be a compromise between mobility and protection. So I thought it would be useful to just go around and ask club members at the event we're at this weekend what it was they were using for longsword and how they found them, if they liked them or not, what are the good points and what are the bad points. And I thought that would be a useful thing, particularly for our students when they're contemplating buying their own, but also for other people, may find it of interest as well.
Okay, so we've been using the Spez Heavy gloves for longsword. Overall, I found them to be a fairly good glove. In regards to protection on slices and hits, they've been great. I've got many, as you can see, on the actual top of it. Once you first get them, they take a little while to wear in to actually give you a bit of dexterity. But once they actually wear in, they're pretty good. The biggest trouble that I've had with them comes from here. It tends to be a fairly light covering of leather between the plates and the actual plastic, in which case I've copped probably about 3 or 4 thrusts to the actual wrist, and given its placement to a van brace, it tends to go underneath the van brace at the same time. That's the only real issue I've had with them.
You've had hits along the edge here as well.
Yep.
Got like a hook power or something across the wrist, I think. And I've had hits myself in the tip of the thumb here. A thrust that's come in and struck the tip of the thumb. I've had that before. They do take a while to break in compared to something where you'd have all 4 fingers available. They are a bit limited in the dexterity for them, particularly for sort of a sort of thrusting guards. I find that they'll be a little bit limited.
Yeah, and at that same point, say going into like an ox, they tend to be fairly limited as well as a catch.
But otherwise, on the back of the hand protection, it's totally solid. Like, I've never once felt threatened or felt any uncomfort being struck on the back of the hand with these on.
Okay, so these are the Koenig gloves from the St. Mark's guys in Sweden, off the top of my head. These are a one-size-fit-all. I think these are a medium size at the moment. I do believe they're actually working on different sizing. Still trying to break them in. You can see that they've got some good, solid, rigid protection all through the fingers. It does make them a little bit bulky. So getting them into something like a side sword furniture is difficult, particularly if it's a knuckle bow that sits close to the hand. These have been excellent for things like spadone and polearm work and longsword. Chief complaint really I have is this section of leather here doesn't allow the sword to sit into this part of the hand properly when you're trying to use it for something like side sword. So it doesn't actually sit. I'm coming from a Bolognese swordsmanship background, so I'm trying to get the finger over the cross, and it's limiting its ability to do that. Other than that, highly recommend them for anything that's two-handed. And I'm still looking for a different solution for single-handed sword work.
Yeah, these are the WMA Shop gloves from WMAshop.com. What's good about them is that they're actually quite protective on the back, and you can get the hand in there, and the wrist has a lot of protection as well from these large plates. The only drawback of having this much protection is that your wrist movement, especially when they're done up on the front, is actually limited quite a fair bit, and changing the direction of cuts becomes quite hard. As you can see, I've tried to reinforce the thumb on this glove, on my right glove, because if I can get there, the split in the centre of the thumb is actually major weak points, and I've taken the hit there on my right thumb, which caused quite a bit of damage.
Can we see it?
Fair thumb? Yep. This is just over a week since I got the injury, and I've lost the thumb now. So, suitable for stuff with semi-protected hilts, I'd say side saws and long rapier with swept hilts. Unsuitable for things with less complex hilts, and definitely not suitable for longsword at all.
So these are the 5-fingered sparring gloves, modified a little bit after we had received them. So I had originally gotten these to try and replace some very, very clunky first-generation absolute force gauntlets that really didn't have any wrist motion and no finger articulation. These seemed like a natural choice because the price point wasn't actually too bad. There was independent finger motion, and a lot of the preliminary reviews showed people getting smacked up pretty badly without suffering any kind of damage. Now I ended up getting these middle of August, and we ended up trying them out a little bit. And kind of the first thing we noticed was that, you know, you could smack this with even a cold steel dagger, and while those things have a reputation for being giant pieces of metal, even light taps we could feel through the fingers. The unfortunate thing is that the gloves that they have here are actually rather quite tight and difficult to get something underneath, and so you can only really slide moderate protection underneath them. Other people I've seen have actually actively cut open these gloves in order to get something better underneath to give themselves a little more padding and prevent the resin in this from actually cutting them. Now, one of our really fast solutions to this, because I was going on a trip at the end of August, was to get some padding and some rubber and kind of scale over the top in order to give a little more shock resistance, and that helped. And with some careful tuning, you can still retain most of the finger mobility by doing that. The unfortunate thing is the way that these gloves are designed, and it looks almost like berry picking gloves, the stitching really quickly starts to shred on you, and I find that the more I close and open my fingers, even without this stuff on the outside, the stitching was coming out, the fingers were getting further and further away from the back of the shell, and it meant that my knuckles were increasingly exposed. So again, we added on a bunch of stuff around the outside, we added some stuff onto the back of the fingers to make that happen, but unfortunately they're still not particularly great. So while a lot of reviews look fantastic in terms of, you know, the mobility that you have, which is fantastic, for anything other than light sparring, I would actually feel quite unsafe using them.
So
the other difficulty is that because of the way these gloves are constructed, the padding, sorry, the yellow gloves on the inside, it makes it very difficult to grip a weapon. Same thing with the resin tips, even without any kind of modification. So if you cut the gloves out of them, or you order it without, that will significantly improve that issue. But again, I think kind of my general review for these is that out of the box, they're not particularly great protective gear. In order for them to be useful, we had to add on a bunch of padding. We had to add padding underneath. And in order for them to be really quite useful for competition sparring, you need to actively cut out pieces of them so you can get grip.
yeah.
So,
What about the wrists?
about the wrists, lots of mobility, and I think people, my understanding is that these are really quite similar to previous sparring gloves. And so for a lot of individuals that have more padding underneath, they find this pretty sufficient. For somebody like myself who's more on the beginner intermediate side of the spectrum, the fact that I might have really exposed wrists, and that this is a quite soft part, means that there might be a chance for injury. Now, I've never really been hit in that part of the wrist before, but I imagine that somebody might get unlucky and be struck in a really unfortunate spot between the plates where there's a little stitching. So, anyway, again, haven't used these as much as I would like to because I haven't felt they were particularly safe. But
And
today,
holding onto the sword is tricky.
holding onto the sword is tricky, but today we're going to get a little bit of change out of that. So, we'll see.
So I use egg armor gauntlets. These are made for SCA heavy combat. They're Kydex. They come just as the shell and a couple of leather straps. You've got to put your own padding and gloves in yourself, and that's really the only downside of it. Because they're plastic, you can shape them to your own hand. So I've carved out this little bit here so that my thumb slots right in there, and I essentially end up with a solid plastic basket hilt around the whole hand. So protection-wise, these are awesome. I have had hard hits on the hands for about 5 or 6 years and not not had any injury at all. So really, really good protection. You can see the thumb is almost fully enclosed. It closes right around the ends of the fingers, so they simply do not get hit anymore. The flared wrist is really, really good as well, because you get your van brace sitting right underneath there, so you get full wrist mobility without any gaps for anything to get through. So in all those ways, these are really, really good. The only trick is really in the assembly. You've got these big rivets, so you've got to put in a layer of, I'll take one off and show you. So I've got a layer of felt under there just to protect my hands from the rivets, and provide a little bit of extra padding and shock absorption. And when you sew the glove in, I've put a couple of extra straps to help hold it in, and I've just sewn in these middle two fingers and the tip of the thumb. If you're going to do this, you should put in a leather washer. Don't just sew the glove directly on, because it will tear through the leather of the glove. You need to have that little suede washer to hold it in. But it does give me really good finger mobility underneath. Those fingers are quite free, so I get a really, really good grip. So for longsword, quarterstaff, and things like that, these are absolutely excellent gloves. The other thing I've got is a pair of simple reproduction finger gauntlets. These are not too heavy, fantastic finger mobility, as you can see, absolutely nothing to get in the way. I put some little plastic finger liners in there just to protect the end of the fingers. I don't use these for longsword per se, but they are excellent for going inside incomplete hilts. Something like a sabre, or a rapier, or a side sword. And even if I'm using something that's essentially hiltless like this, where I need the dexterity of a fairly unencumbered hand to hold it properly, just in this particular case hanging on with the little finger and letting the thing swing around, against glancing blows that you get in single-handed swords, this is more than sufficient protection, and it is much, much better than any sort of big, bulky, lacrosse-y type glove. If you need a little bit of extra protection, if you're using a sword like that, the historical solution is the finger buckler. So this is a very pretty one. This is Arm Street, and that just protects the fingers and knuckles from impact, and with the gauntlet underneath, that's pretty well impenetrable, but doesn't again get in the way of your ability to swing your hands, and as soon as you close the grapple, it all comes apart and you've got full finger mobility. So these things are actually highly underrated as hand protection.
So the one product that we actually have a lot of in the club that you didn't see reviewed were the Red Dragons. And that's basically because I couldn't find anybody who's still using them for longsword. People are only prepared to put them inside side sword hilts and things like that. But they obviously have the same issues as the WMA shop type gloves and any of those lacrosse hockey based things. Now, my personal feeling on all this is that while it's good to see people trying to come up with novel solutions to the problem, I do think there's a little bit of reinvention of the wheel going on here. Okay, first of all, there are perfectly good historical solutions that really haven't been explored. Finger bucklers, I think, have the potential of really, really helping if we can get, basically free finger movement where the fingers are not protected by the glove per se, but by some sort of finger buckler type arrangement that sits over the top, is just held on with a strap, and as soon as you let go, that whole sort of arrangement falls off and allows you to grapple. And I really like my sort of Nazgul looking gauntlets there. And the other thing, of course, is that reenactors, and in particular the SCA, have been whacking each other on the hands really, really hard for many, many decades. And they have come up with some really good solutions for hand protection, fully enclosed steel thumbs, and probably the best gauntlets I have ever seen or had on my hands have been really high-end SCA steel gauntlets. which I don't have any to show you because they were really, really expensive, but they really were excellent. Not bulky at all, sitting very close to the hand, but fully protective and just rolled up into a solid steel ball that was completely impenetrable. So I think it's actually worth talking to SEA armourers about some of the experiences they have and the solutions they have come up with for hand protection, and we could probably learn a lot there and perhaps come up with something that is more suitable for HEMA use, because at the moment there's not a lot out there that is really entirely satisfactory.